You keep thinking about it, not every day, but often enough that it still hurts. Maybe it was something you said, or something you didn't. Maybe it was a decision you made years ago that felt right in the moment, but afterward left a bruise on your heart. You've told yourself, I did the best I could. You've apologized out loud or silently. You've tried to move on. But somehow the guilt lingers, quiet, heavy, unresolved. Why is that? Why does the past still feel so loud, even after all this time? The answer isn't simple, but it's not your fault either. You see, guilt isn't always just about the event itself. Sometimes it's about who you were when it happened. And even more than that, it's about who you think you should have been. You look back with today's eyes, wiser, clearer, more aware, and you hold that version of yourself to a standard that version never had a chance to meet. That's where guilt festers. Psychologist Dr. Guy Winch puts it this way: guilt is our emotional response when we feel we've violated our moral code. But often the guilt persists not because of the event, but because we haven't forgiven ourselves for being imperfect. And here's the hard truth: guilt clings to the places where self-forgiveness never arrived. Before we dive deeper, if you've ever carried a weight like this, consider subscribing. This space is for people who are healing in quiet ways. Those who are learning to forgive themselves not just once, but every single day. Now let's talk about why guilt feels so permanent. Most people think guilt fades with time, but research from the American Psychological Association shows that guilt, especially chronic guilt, can persist for years if it's not processed properly. It's not just a feeling, it's a psychological loop. You feel guilty, then you judge yourself for still feeling guilty. Then you feel guilty about that too, and it goes on until it becomes part of how you see yourself. Not as someone who made a mistake, but as the mistake itself. That's where guilt turns toxic. Dr. Brené Brown distinguishes between guilt and shame by saying, guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And the longer we sit with unprocessed guilt, the more it morphs into that quieter, more dangerous belief that we're somehow fundamentally flawed. But let me tell you something that might feel uncomfortable at first. You don't need to keep punishing yourself to prove you care. You don't need to keep replaying the scene in your head to show you've learned something. Regret is part of growth, but guilt should be a teacher, not a life sentence. Here's the part no one tells you. Sometimes we hold on to guilt because it gives us a sense of control. We think, if I keep feeling bad, then I'm doing something. I'm making it right in some way. But in reality, it just keeps you stuck in the past. It traps you in a version of yourself that no longer exists. So how do we let it go? First, acknowledge that you are a different person now, literally. Neuroscience shows that our brains are constantly rewiring our values, our emotional responses, our levels of empathy. The person who made that decision back then is not the same person listening to this message right now. Second, challenge the belief that guilt equals responsibility. Sometimes we take on guilt for things that weren't fully ours to carry. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was tied to perfection, where making mistakes came with silence or punishment. That kind of environment trains your brain to believe, if something went wrong, it must be my fault. But not everything painful in life is your fault. And even when it was your decision, you are still allowed to heal. Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl once said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You can't change what happened, but you can change how you live with it. Start by speaking to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. Would you say, you should still be ashamed of this? Or would you say, you made a mistake, you've grown, you're trying, because that voice becomes your truth. And healing requires truth rooted in compassion, not punishment. If the guilt you carry is connected to someone else, reach out if it feels right. But remember, forgiveness from others is not a prerequisite for forgiving yourself. Sometimes the closure has to come from within. Write the letter. Say what you wish you had said. Then choose peace, even if you never get a reply. You're not broken for struggling with guilt. You're human. And sometimes healing is just a quiet decision repeated daily. I no longer punish myself for a version of me that didn't know better. You've suffered long enough. Let today be the day you begin to set that burden down. Not because you've forgotten what happened, but because you finally understand that guilt is not proof of love. Your growth is, your awareness is, your willingness to do better now, that's what matters most. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. If you've been carrying guilt that no one else can see, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Subscribe and be part of a quiet space where healing is not rushed and forgiveness, especially for yourself, is finally allowed. Thank you for watching.